Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. I'm Kamini, and I'm your host for today. My guest today is Dr. Emma Schleiger, who is Head of AI and Governance at Cadent, a digital and technology consultancy based in Australia. Welcome, Emma.
Thank you, Kamini.
So, Emma, let's get started by you telling us how you went from a PhD in neuroscience to an AI governance leader.
Sure. So I call it alternative pathways into technology. And I think that the funny thing is that you'll see neuroscientists, a lot of neuroscientists are in these funny square peg holes that don't fit other groups. And whenever you sort of see someone that's in a niche thing, there will be a neuroscientist there. And I can't explain why. But anyway, so I did my PhD, was in clinical neuroscience. Around 2016, I finished that. Towards the end of it, I knew that I didn't want to keep going down a more and more narrow academic pursuit. Specifically, I was looking at stroke patients using EEG. And so I did research ethics for a little while, a few years at the Queensland Brain Institute. And I met, they were called the Insights Group, a group operating in CSIRO's Data 61. And they were tasked with writing a roadmap for Australia's AI strategy and a discussion paper that would be used to form Australia's national AI ethics principles. And it was just a very well-timed, happy coincidence that I met the people at the right time, and I was able to join the team and lead this discussion paper as a very sort of green academic in digital tech space. And that really started me down a pathway at CSIRO, where this sort of started off looking at sort of the ethics lens, and from that worked with more multidisciplinary teams like ethicists, designers, developers of AI systems to work out how AI ethics principles, which are very high level, actually get translated down into design choices or development patterns and things like that. And from there, my research sort of grew around, responsible innovation and how we are using digital tech in ways that are aligned with human values, collaborative human AI collaboration. So how can we use or develop technologies in ways that complement what humans are really good at doing and what they love doing, rather than outsource or replace that work? So it was 7 years of really getting to pull apart the really the socio-technical complexity of AI systems.
What does it mean, Emma, socio-technical? Can you just break it down for us,
Yeah,
perhaps?
yeah, of course. So when we're talking about AI, and sometimes it hurts when we say AI as though it's one thing, when we know that it's a collective of systems and tools that are widely different in their capabilities and applicability across, our entire world. Essentially, there's no sector that's not touched. And so when we talk about socio-technical, all AI systems are socio-technical because they are used by humans. And if we're looking at socio-technical systems as from an academic perspective, it includes things like processes and practices, documentation. So typically it's an organizational approach. So it's just there's 6 sides of it. Don't ask me to recall all of them, but it's essentially the technical systems and then the humans and the sort of organizational human processes around those technical systems. So it's just a neat way to sort of capture the complexity of systems that are used by humans and on humans.
Right, right. I think I understand. So what you're essentially saying is the technical part of it is the AI and the systems, and the social stuff is actually the policies, procedures, and behavioral aspects of interfacing with that technology, or not quite.
Yeah, yeah. Well, because you can break it down any number of ways, because we can talk about people as individuals, we can talk about people as groups, and then coming from those people, they have cultures and norms, and then obviously, if you're thinking about those things, you start talking about their goals and objectives and how they're using technology for those systems, and it gets so broad. So when we say socio-technical, it just gives you an umbrella to put all that complexity under a nice, neat sort of frame. Yeah.
It's interesting how our language around AI is evolving and changing all the time. I mean, I was listening to something the other day and they say, well, we're not going to use the word trustworthy AI anymore because of what. I can't remember the exact reason, but I'm thinking we are in a matter of months, we are developing, creating, changing, and manipulating language as the technology
Mm,
dictates. And it's such an interesting aspect of the way our society is actually. We've created the technology, but we are changing around to accommodate that technology, as it were.
mm,
Whether it's a good
mm,
thing or bad thing, I don't know. But yeah.
mm. I think it's inevitable, right? And with all technology, we've sort of seen that sort of impact. Even if you go back to, everyone likes to use the example of horse and cart, and then the cars came in and we changed the way we operated and work. We could work further away from home. Women could travel more freely, and so our culture changes with new technologies, and AI is no different. But I think that where AI really presents challenges is the ability for it to scale that impact so fast, compared to other technologies that need to physically be built and rolled out. It was a much slower process than what we see with AI.
Just going back to your background in neuroscience, one of the aspects
Mm-hmm.
of this hyper innovative phase that we are currently in is
Mm,
we have the ground moving beneath our feet. But at the same
mm-hmm.
time, the question I always ask people with your background is, are human beings designed to evolve and adapt at the speed at which we are being forced to?
Oh, I don't think so. No. I think, well, I mean, there's variation across the human spectrum. And when I specifically, I know Australia cultural norms the best, and Australians are not fast adopters. We're not innovators like the Americans are. We trust is very important. Yeah, it's probably very similar with South Africa and New Zealanders as well. We are much more cautious. We don't have that real entrepreneurial innovation bug that they have in the States. And so definitely for Australian culture, no, we can't. It's too fast for us to adopt, and that's why I can get really niche in sort of what's happening in Australia. But there's a lot of discourse around the best way to move forward, and there are still camps within Australia that are really pro innovation, and we need to build fast and break things, but the general population, and they've done some really good surveys around this, Australia are laggards. We are still very untrustworthy. We still don't have regulation that enables people to trust, and our population doesn't have that digital literacy to to really understand what the risks are. They know that they're risks, but they don't know enough to make any moves or have a direction around that.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I can certainly, I think we're in the same page basically, but we're a bit, in South Africa, I think we're a bit more behind than that, because,
Mm,
you always think to yourself, we have global access to global platforms and the
mm,
same access to information. So we should be iterating at the same pace, but that isn't true because, as you
mm,
say, socio-technical means that you're bringing in your own value system, cultural biases, and
mm,
all of those things. That are you a highly individualistic society, are you more hierarchical, and all of that
mm.
impacts on the rate of adoption. And it's
Yes.
and I don't even think we can make it a value judgment to say it's a bad thing or a good thing because each has its own merits as well. So
Yeah, and different risk profiles, right? There's the
absolutely.
failure to move, and that's your risk, or moving too fast and breaking everything is also a risk. But what the example I always rely on or fall back on is in the mid 2000s, mines were becoming very automated, and the technology was there for them to start implementing robotic teammates and really automate a lot of the processes. And the technology was there. It was highly reliable, accurate, and all of those things. But the on the ground workers refused to work with an automated system because they didn't trust it, they didn't understand it. And it ended up that a lot of organizations actually had to walk back some of their innovation because they didn't properly prepare or consult with the people that would be most impacted by that technology. And in those highly critical safety environments, there's just no way forward. And they had to walk back and, wait for the workforce to be ready for that innovation. So you can't have one without the other.
Yeah, this is probably it's been said for the 100 millionth time, but culture eats strategy for breakfast, and I've seen it again and again. And when people say, "Oh no, but if you have the right implementation in terms of your," I've seen it. It doesn't work. If your people don't buy into the process, it's not going to work.
No.
And if you're insisting, you're going to get malicious compliance, which is not helping you at the end of the day
Mm,
either. So,
mm.
just getting back to the topic, Emma, so you've moved
I'm
from
writing that down. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. That's such a great line.
Peter Drucker. Yeah. Uh, Before you were born, most probably. So you made this transition. So getting back,
Mm,
we're having such a nice diversion here, but you made the transition from CSIRO, one of
mm-hmm,
Australia's premier research institutions, to Cadent, an AI
mm-hmm,
development and AI governance consultancy. So can you tell us
mm-hmm,
how has this shifted your perspective on the gap between AI governance theory and what actually
mm,
happens on the ground? Because I know you spoke about here we have the principles, and here we have to move down and say here's a design choices, responsible innovation. But
mm.
how did that shift happen for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a different world. Away from a research organization. And so we worked with clients at CSIRO, but they were mainly government, big departmental, sector-wide sort of strategy that we were helping them develop. And here we're, B2B on the ground, hands dirty. So it's a very different perspective. And for me, it's been a very enlightening process in working out sort of what works and what doesn't, and what appeals, because essentially, every organization has a limited budget to apply to their responsible AI initiatives, or AI initiatives full stop. And if they're going to proportion part of that to responsible or ethical development and use, or governance, you have to deliver something that is meaningful to that organization. So I guess part of it was really getting away from that high level societal lens to like, how do we capture and sell return on investment to organizations? Because I know that AI governance is the right thing to do, and I know that it brings value and it helps them make better strategic decisions and not burn money on, the latest, greatest, shiniest tool or bit of kit. But actually translating that to an organizational context is really a key skill that I've had to develop. And looking at things from a commercial, as a scientist, I never really needed to look at things from a commercial lens. That was always someone else's job. But obviously working in the industry now, that is the bread and butter of how we do business. So ensuring that there's commercial value and commercial returns. Cadent, also, I should say, for us, we're a social enterprise, so we have loftier goals, or what I would say more important goals than just commercial revenue. We want to make good impact, but that's not, that's the exception, not the rule for industry, essentially.
So you say Cadent wants to make a social impact. So So I'm just trying to understand, because I see it as quite a difficult job to sell making a social difference by saying, or including saying, that AI governance is tied to your strategic value. So how do you actually balance that? Because you give us a budget for this, and it actually makes sense in terms of return on investment. That's one. Gives you a competitive advantage, gives you sustainability of all these things. But the question is, how do you sell all of that?
Look, I think the sort of first thing and the hardest lesson was meeting the market where it's at. And I don't think South Africa will be that different. Australia is still looking at AI governance as like GRC. They want to be compliant, and that's not really where AI governance is at, because we are unregulated in Australia. Obviously we have existing legislation, you can't just do anything, but there are no rules about how you should govern your systems and use them. And it doesn't look like there will be any anytime soon. And so approaching it from a compliance perspective is not particularly helpful. And so part of, our services is really meeting an organization where it is at and building up their capability to see the value. And it can be things as simple, like a lot of the organizations we speak to, their board or their C-suite is like, oh, that AI thing, we got to get on that and just throw AI at things. Let's not think about the problems, AI is the solution. And I hear this and I just it makes me cringe, because it's all the wrong things to be doing. You don't want to be throwing money at AI solutions when an AI solution isn't required. It overcomplicates things. So taking a step back, building that governance up so that they have the processes and practices and culture, as well as the capability to properly do business cases, assess where the problems are, what problems are worth solving, what problems require AI, and then how to build metrics and measurement around those initiatives to ensure, that they were, the money that they continue to put into them, even after they're rolled out, is giving you that return. So obviously it's different industry to industry, or organization to organization, but I think that's sort of the key things is meeting them where they're at, understanding their context, what their business objectives are, and then selling. And when I say selling, it sounds like we're making it up, but and educating sounds patronizing. So I think it is bringing their attention to how governance can enable them to achieve those business objectives. Is essentially like where we start. And that you can always go down the risk line. But I'm an optimist. I like to stay on the optimistic side of things. So, we always throw in, the reputational risk, financial risks of not doing things the right way. But I like to look at it as the value add. For me, it's the big sell.
Thanks for that, Emma. I mean, the way I look at it, it could be that I'm not very I prefer not to do the compliance approach. So if you sell it from a branding, reputational, competitive advantage perspective, then the lights start flashing, because it's like, so you are saying that we can actually get a bigger market share or appeal to so and so or do this. Not that you're doing the right thing or anything like that, but obviously not everyone. Yeah. So it's like you are, or your organization was the one that ensured, in terms of the protection of personal information and data privacy and unbiased data sets. You guys were fantastic. But from a compliance perspective, it's a different conversation, and then I see a tendency to get a bit disengaged on the topic, and especially when it comes to the salespeople, you have to pitch in a certain way to them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, what you captured there is, if you're going on that positive gains, you're selling them something that they can acquire, whereas compliance is just avoiding loss. And that's never going to seem as valuable as giving them this competitive advantage that also happens to be a very, good, socially good thing to be doing, which is, bonus for me. And for some organizations, that's really important. Those that trade in trust, like our fellow social enterprises, not-for-profits, for them, that's really important. But, for a big engineering firm, it's not as important. That social good is not as important for most.
Yeah, and then you start looking at, when it comes to risk management as well, you start telling them governance in terms of protection, not in terms of compliance, but in terms of protection. Like, for example, now we get into a point where the level of when it comes to fraudulent activities, we're getting onto another level completely now, with deepfake and that sort of thing. So if you are spinning it in terms of its governance to protect your executives against X, Y, and Z,
it's tangible. Yeah.
So you've gone from academia, and now you at the coalface of these issues. And what's the biggest myth you encounter when organizations talk about AI governance? I know you're a good person, so you don't roll your eyes, but but what's the biggest myth you encounter?
I think it's really how long is a piece of string, like in terms of these myths. So we did a little poll on LinkedIn a while back just to sort of understand where our networks were at, essentially, because you get trapped in, your perception is your bubble, and my bubble is people who are much smarter and more technical than I, and they have really deep understanding of AI systems and how they work and how best to use them and what's out there on the market. But that isn't the reality for, general population. And so I think some of those were surprising around privacy, I think is one of them, particularly with shadow AI, organizations know that they have shadow AI in their enterprise, but they don't really know the volume of their IP and commercially sensitive information, potentially privacy conflicts that are going into open source, models or GPTs and Geminis. And I think that the sort of myth that because they say don't do this means that their staff aren't doing it. And even when they put sort of pieces in place, it doesn't stop their staff from going and using their own personal device to run the same work. Once someone has seen, the work that they can outsource to a Gen AI, and then it's like, well, no, you have to do that yourself. It's such a hard thing to walk back. So if they don't have the governance in place and the sort of training and learning required to really tackle those challenges, I think that, one of the myths is sort of like, well, we said not to use it, so they're not using it.
No, that's
Yeah.
I can understand your concern, and it's also a concern of mine because companies are poised between saying don't use it because we're not sure about the safety, or use it because we have to get onto the wave. But nobody's
Yes.
having that conversation about, guys, please don't upload the entire report with our sales figures onto ChatGPT to analyze for you with our name and the names of our customers. Nobody's having those conversations because, I think maybe I'm just cynical, but to a certain extent, there's a plausible deniability about it. We didn't know that. We expected you to behave in a certain way, but who knows? Do you expect a normal employee who's saying that I'm so overworked, this is going to take me like half an hour instead of 4 days, and say I'm actually going to be very, very circumspect when I use ChatGPT and not mention this and that and that. And companies themselves are saying very little to say these are how you use it. You turn off this feature or that feature to ensure that your data is not tracked or whatever the thing is. And the expectation is that the employee is going to, upskill themselves. I mean, what sort of expectation is that? And it's your IP, as you said. It's your IP that you are talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, even if you have commercial licenses where your data is not fed back into training models, essentially anything that you put into Gen AI, you need to have an expectation that will one day be leaked, that is sitting somewhere, and there will be a breach and that will be out. So you need to be comfortable, even with the protection that you have put in place, that information will be available. So you do need to be very careful of what you're putting in.
And from you do obviously have industries where the data is very sensitive, but then I also noticed that I keep my eye out for these things, but I don't know of a single government who has told their civil servants, well, this is the process for that. And we're talking about extremely sensitive information and confidential information. So that is a bit of a concern. And, and I think sometimes it's symptomatic of people don't want to stick their neck out and say, excuse me, this is a major concern. And when you look at your, and I'd like to know really how many risk managers have this on their risk register. We're telling people to use technology. We are not controlling, monitoring, or educating them on the use. Fantastic.
We're working with an organization that's building technical guardrails to prevent so essentially it's a SaaS program, and it sits on staff computers. And so I go into GPT and I start writing people's names, phone numbers, IP, anything, and it has the ability to detect what I'm inputting, redact it before it goes out. And so it's like a technical guardrail to like stop people who don't know. And like it's meeting us where we're at in wildly releasing huge amounts of our own commercial or personal data into these systems, and that stops it. So that, you know, there's organizations that have seen that market gap, and they're building, you know, programs to stop that. So organizations, I'd say that they still need governance to support that. You know, you can't just like you know, take away someone's dinner kind of thing, you know, a hard, fast rule. People need to understand why it's important, and the reason behind it, so that, you know, when a technical guardrail fails, they have the knowledge and ability to change their behavior. But anyway, it's a cool sort of thing that, yeah, there's a gap in the market, and there's people moving into that gap.
No, that's good to hear because I mean, we've obviously had the discussion about how do we stop it at source or in terms of protections and guardrails, but are we not having that conversation enough, which is what you raised, is as my personal agent, how can I create those guardrails for myself and in my space? You know, so it's essentially like saying one of those, you know, those child-proof guardrails.
Yeah,
Say, but it's
yeah,
for myself. I don't want to hear about this, and I don't want the following data to go, and that sort of thing. So it's good to hear that the market is picking up on that, you know, customizable personal agents that I can get interface with all my devices and protect me.
Yeah. So it's like it can tap into your browser. So whatever, they have like hundreds of systems listed there that, you know, it knows that you're in Gemini, and it knows that you shouldn't be entering financial information. But I kind of look at it like, you know, it's different when you're talking about commercially, but personally, when we're using these things, it's kind of like, you know, 99% of people aren't going to read a full terms and conditions before they click the accept thing. And it's kind of the same with how we use Gen AI. It's like, oh, you know what, but I really want to use it to do this thing because I don't want to write that email. So I'm just going to accept the risk that, you know, I'm putting this information in there. And I feel like it's really on that same level of like, you know, you make 100 decisions, you know, more than 100 decisions every day, and that just becomes another one of those decisions where you're like, oh, you know, I'll take that risk now, but you're building this data repository of yourself, and that's, you know, super risky, but they're just little decisions that you continuously make.
Yeah, but I suppose you can't make these huge, you know, safeguards in your systems. Like, I will never visit Australia because you don't have spiders, you have spiders in capital letters. So on my feed, I never want to see a spider. I don't want to hear about spiders. I don't want to have anything to do with spiders. And if I could just create my agent to do that, it's one thing out of my
just remove spider content. That'd be cool. I'm sure there's a product out there for it.
So, coming to what you've learned thus far, coming from academia, getting on the ground, and whatever you've learned in terms of your strategic foresight expertise, all of these years, what risks are organizations not seeing coming that you have noticed again and again that this is the story?
I think it's that the risk is that they are not they're not seeing that early adoption of good governance as valuable. They all say, oh, you know, but we're not really using AI yet, so we don't need governance. And sort of our response is like, that's the best time to put governance in, because you are a, you know, 200 plus employee service industry, and you will be, if you're not using AI, you will very shortly be using AI, or you will fall behind. And so the best place to put, I mean, any time is good to put governance in, but putting it in the start is way less complicated, and you get way more value because every initiative is going through, you know, like a proper assessment process. You have the risk metrics already in there. You have the structures set up to support responsible use. You can start at that 101 level of education. So I think it's just it's putting off that investment until things are really complicated and out of hand, and that's really coming from that sort of what we talked about earlier, that compliance perspective of we'll do it when it's regulated, and rather than looking at it as a compliance thing, not seeing the value that good governance can bring to an organization. You're just done silent.
Oh, sorry. Oh, cool. Thanks. So I just saw those headlines the other day, and perhaps you can just give your comment on this. There was an MIT report that said 95% of generative AI pilots at companies are failing. What on earth is happening here?
I haven't read that specific report. I would love for you to send it to me. 95 is a crazy number. I'd be interested to know, a generative AI initiative could be so many different things. But I often go back to there was a RAND study in 2024 that is, you might be familiar with it. It's fascinating. So it's like the critical reasons why AI initiatives fail, and the top culprits are trying to fit an AI solution onto a problem that isn't requiring AI. It is wanting to use the latest, greatest, shiniest, coolest toys rather than what is best for this, whatever the problem is. It's moving to solutions before you've properly identified what the issue is, and explored it in its full contextual glory. And I think that they were the core sort of reasons. There was a few other underneath, but they're the ones that sort of we hear about most commonly. We often, I think I mentioned it before, we have the people that we speak to, they say, we're reaching out because C-suite or our board told us we need to be using AI yesterday, but our workforce is not there. I speak to sort of people that are 50 plus, and they're just no, I don't use any generative AI. I don't trust it. I don't know what it's about. I don't understand it. And they're so far from really having any gains from it. They need a 101 sort of lesson. And part of that is just, meeting people where they're at without judgment. Hey, it's not big and scary. It can be as simple, you're already using AI in your search engines, your emails, your streaming services. It's just, here's the real basics, and then you sort of build confidence and trust from there.
Thanks, Emma. That makes sense to me. Meeting people where you're at, but it's what can AI do for you where you're at as well, and but also there's this tendency onto, I've seen quite a few examples of it, is we have to get onto this AI bus. But before they start that journey, they should be asking questions in terms of process, function, industry, is it fit for purpose? It's not this panacea, the silver bullet for everything. Is it fit for purpose? Your first question. Then you can move on, can we streamline our process flow, do this or that? But sometimes you just have to say, hang on, it's actually not going to help us get anywhere, because we 98% of compliance, or 98% of our return of investment is there. It's not going to exponentially increase something. So
No. Yeah. So there's a good, the 10K rule is usually a common measurement that people use whether an AI initiative is worth investing in. And so depending on the size of the organization, it could be it needs to be a returning 10K on your investment and depending, that 10K could be a yearly return. So it needs to be, or if it's a huge organisation, it could be an hourly or daily return, so that it's sort of your guideline of, does this require invest? Is this a big enough problem that we need to throw AI at it to solve, or is that just like, that would be really cool, but it doesn't actually give us any satisfaction or productivity gains. It's just like a shiny object kind of thing. And then it just, when you were talking then, it reminded me of that, the other sort of big issue is data. And so putting AI initiatives in place with data governance or even proper data assets that can be verified, it's just that garbage in, garbage out.
You tell people it's so that data labeling is so important, and they don't believe you. They think that AI is going to magically fix everything and label it and everything. And you say, go back, take 6 months, go and label your data first before you do anything else. I think what my concern is when it comes to these AI initiatives is that sometimes people don't think about, adding more complexity to a complex system. And if you're adding more complexity, you are increasing the rate at which a system can go down, because there's so many moving parts. And
100%.
I think that it comes down to, like, you have a directive from your board and nobody's brave enough to put it in their hands and say, actually, it's working at 98%, and if we add this, it's another additional layer of complexity and it's going to break,
And you're getting 2%. So is it worth it?
Exactly.
Yeah, I think this is part of, like, having those strategy people in AI governance conversations, so that, it's tied to those business objectives, and you have the vocabulary and the language to be able to ask these critical questions at critical junctures to make better decisions.
Thanks, Emma. So let's look at reasons for hope. What gives you hope about closing these gaps in responsible AI development?
What gives me hope? I think, I'm a perennial optimist. I'll only be down for short periods of time and then back up again. I think the things that give me hope is the number of people that I see that are putting their time towards ensuring that we're using, developing, deploying AI in responsible and safe ways. There's a lot of groundswell organizations that are popping up, and their whole remit is around responsible AI. And they're really clear signals for what people care about. And the same, that's, in Australia, anytime they do any sort of public polling, the public is very clear that they want regulations. They don't trust it. They don't know enough about it. They want some assurance that they can use to sort of bet their trust on. And I think that they're all signals that are sort of showing us in AI governance or responsible AI research, or however you sit in that data governance. There's so many roles, that it is needed, it is wanted, and right now we're meeting the market where they're at, and it's a little bit, you have to walk gently, but I think that I can see shifts, and there's change happening. People are listening, and it's really nice after being here in this space for 8 years, that it's not a niche sort of topic.
I'm sorry, I'm digressing, but you sound like one of those virologists during COVID. They study the entire life, and it's like, and they probably like 55 or 60 die. I told you people to listen to me.
I said this 20 years ago. Yeah, I can imagine that. It'll be on my deathbed. I told you so. Yeah. I think that's probably true, but I mean, this has been a pretty quick turnaround from it being a very niche sort of thing to, you know, AI's in everyone's mouth. Everyone wants to talk about it. And closely following that is responsible, safe, trust, governance, and all of those things. So, yeah, and positive, optimistic.
You've been recognized as a leader in bringing diverse perspectives to AI governance.
Mm.
So, if I were a white male, why does it matter from my perspective that I should listen to diverse perspectives?
They can only, like, I think that, you know, there's this common perspective that it's a nice to have diverse voices. And we've seen what happens when you have a single demographic in a room, in terms of what happens in Silicon Valley, what happens in these big tech companies where, you know, decisions are always around the bottom line, and they're, you know, it's not for the betterment of society or a reflection of different needs. I think, you know, it is so obvious to me, it's hard to even explain why we need diverse perspectives.
I'm glad you said that because from, not everyone obviously, but from a white male perspective, all people who have traditionally been in positions of privilege, it's difficult to conceptualize, but everything is fine from my perspective. What are you saying? I don't understand what your point is here, you know?
Yeah, I think I was talking about it with my husband today, and I was saying, you know, something about the confidence to respond to clients in a really decisive way when I know what they're saying is wrong. But that thing of doubt, being a woman, you're always like, socially from day one, it's that thing of like, oh, but maybe I've missed something. Maybe it's my fault. Maybe is something there. And my husband was saying, you know, you're an expert. Like, people come to you to ask these questions. You know, it's saying all these things. Just like, back yourself. And I was like, yeah. And I think some people are born with that. And then I sort of thought about it, and I was like, all the people I know like that are white dudes. And he was like, it's just a man thing. And he's like, yeah, it probably is. Um, and I think that's, you know, that's part of it. When I've worked on really diverse teams, it's just that level of collaboration and those ideas or concepts that I might not have thought of, or like those caveats, those perspectives that I have no experience in, bringing that all together, the way that their brains, you know, people from different backgrounds, ages, cultures, we all have these heuristics and shortcuts in the way that we work, and bringing that together can only benefit what you are trying to build or solve. I think, yeah, it's inherently obvious to me.
No, I get what you're saying. I know what you're saying. You're struggling to articulate because it's so obvious that the more diverse,
Mm,
the more diverse voices you have, the more you're solutioning for possible, issues. And at the end of
mm,
the day, the sum of the parts makes up the whole. Just looking ahead, what's the most
mm.
critical gap that needs addressing in responsible AI?
I think that I think it's just literacy, and sort of even surface level understanding. It's sort of like that AI 101 level, is really missing from a big percentage of the population, and I'm sure Australia is not unique in that. Um, and that's where it needs to start, essentially. The more you know, the more wisely you can use these tools, the more you can think about the impact on your workflow, and make better strategic choices, both personally and organizationally.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you in that because literacy needs to be starting at primary school, because
Mm.
we're talking about digital natives here, and it worries me the level of exposure to what I perceive to be unacceptable content kids have these days. And I know
Mm.
Australia's done very well with starting off with these initiatives. But
Mm.
the thing is, as not only youngsters, but I mean, people my age. It's a
Mm.
bit of a challenge. I mean, I'm over 50, and people my age, we move through the entire transition, and for I know for a fact a lot of people use ChatGPT as Google, you know.
Mm.
And when you're in that position where you don't know how to stop yourself from being in an echo chamber, how to
Mm.
consume the right news sources, or
Yes.
determine the value of the information coming to you, it becomes dangerous. I mean, we see in the US, which is becoming an increasingly polarized society, and it's freedom of expression. I'm still on the fence with the freedom of expression thing. To what extent do you have the right to have an opinion on scientific data? But that's a whole nother conversation. I think
I could talk about that one for a long time.
the rest of us on the planet just roll our eyes when it comes to issues like that. But for some reason, in that particular jurisdiction, it becomes such an emotive topic.
Mm. Mm. It
Ah,
was like that, that initiative that came out of the States recently where, AI systems have to be free from bias. But when they say bias, they said something like the woke bias for the woke agenda. And it was just like, hang on, this is double speak. Like, you're saying two opposite things and putting them together. It's lunacy. Anyway, we shouldn't go down the States line.
just diverting again. A couple of weeks ago, I was looking at the Chinese legislation versus the US legislation on AI safety. So,
Mm-hmm.
so, so, so this was my take on it, which may be right or wrong because I'm not an expert on it. But my take was the Chinese were very pragmatic and say, what is
Mm-hmm.
the harm? Let's risk manage this risk in a particular way by
Mm-hmm.
having the stamps on the fake deep fake and that sort of thing, very
Yes.
pragmatic solutions to actually to
Mm-hmm.
protect the people from the harm that AI presents. Yet the US's
Mm-hmm.
take on the entire thing, let's reduce the amount of guardrails because our position is in relation to us being able to innovate to outpace the Chinese. And yes, I did roll
Mm-hmm.
my eyes because you know I mean, as we know that the Chinese they plan a long time,
Yes, yes. Yeah, the
yes,
20 years planning.
20 years planning. And, there's obviously lots of merits in that approach, as opposed to your planning depending on the political figurehead. And if you have somebody who lacks a certain foresight on other things, yeah, but if you have that, what is the impact on your society? Societies don't work in 5-year terms. Societies
Yeah.
and nations don't work like that. What are you actually doing in terms of your psyche of your nation? But that is another topic for another day. So,
Yeah.
just to conclude, we've run way over time, but it's been so much fun. Being a risk manager for most of my career, the question I'd like to ask is you mentioned your kids. What keeps you up at night in terms of AI risks?
Well, here's the open. I think it really is that build fast and break things mentality where when it comes to AI, the bottom line seems to be commercial gain and money, and that's fine. But when we're treating our human rights, our freedoms, our the way our society operates, fairness, equality for those gains is where there is a huge ethical line drawn. And because AI can move so fast, because it's scaling so fast, it's not that we haven't seen these challenges before, it's that these challenges are emerging with such veracity, and across such a broad, all of society, all of different industries, all people of different ages and demographics. That's where the risk that really bothers me and keeps me up at night is, what kind of world my children going to be in. They're like 5 and 3, so they're not using any technology currently, but it's not far off. And yeah, I worry of what world we're going to be leaving them, what legacy.
Thanks for that.
So they will be two white dudes, so they've already got a leg up.
Oh goodness, yeah, no, it's actually, thinking back to my childhood, who would have envisioned, when I went to university like 30 years ago, that I would be living in a hyper innovative crisis, VUCA, Barney, and volatile to an extent that it's often difficult to comprehend the interconnected nature of those risks, and maybe it's a good thing we're getting AI in, because our human brains, I don't think we have the capability of forecasting when you have all of those touch points in your ecosystem bouncing off each other all the time.
Yeah, that digitalization. I mean, when we've done strategic foresight work in the past, these big mega trends, that question around globalization, it just comes up every time. That interconnectedness and that it's changing so rapidly. And yeah, I think you're 100% right that your ability to conceptualize all of those links and that data that you're putting out, it's just, inconceivable for my brain anyway.
And okay, I have to have you on again because I want to talk to you at some point about neural networks and what's your opinion on that? Uh, to end off and conclude on our fascinating topic, it's been so much fun. Thank you, Emma. What developments in AI give you the most hope or confidence?
The one that comes to mind currently is how we can use AI for the social sector, so for not-for-profits, for social enterprises, to really uplift that social good that those types of organization, that's their remit, that's their business objective, is to leave the world a better place than they entered it. And so I think, AI has a real potential to enable those organizations that are often working on tight budgets to deliver more with less. So, as an enabler for those sectors, that gives me a lot of hope. And maybe it'll balance out some of the less positive parts of, how AI is used to displace workforces. For that sector, it's a good news day.
Dr. Emma Schleiger, thank you very much for your time. It's been a fascinating, insightful, and quite fun conversation. And hopefully we'll do it soon again.
Thank you so much.
Bye, Emma.
Bye. Bye.